Chicago, in the final frigid days of December, was a city of sharp edges and blurred light. A relentless, icy drizzle slicked the old cobblestones of Evanston, turning the fallen leaves of the ancient sycamore tree in the front yard into a sodden, brown carpet. The air, thick with the damp smell of wet earth, rotting wood, and the distant, lonely call of a commuter train, felt both deeply nostalgic and suffocatingly melancholic. My name is Alara Vance. I was 34 years old, working as an internal accountant for a mid-sized medical supply distributor in downtown Chicago. At that point, I had been married for nearly 6 years. My husband, Julian Croft, was the youngest son in a family that, from the outside, appeared to be the absolute epitome of dignified, old-money success. The Croft family mansion, a stately red-brick Georgian home, stood proudly at the end of a quiet, tree-lined street. 2 perfectly sculpted junipers flanked the wrought iron front gate, framing a sprawling brick patio that became as treacherous as an ice rink in the damp winter chill. The heavy oak front door seemed designed to keep the cold world out and preserve the family's carefully crafted image within. The neighbors often spoke of the Crofts' incredible good fortune. They saw a family with 3 successful sons, a father who was once a prominent figure in regional real estate development, and a mother who moved through high society charity events in a cloud of designer dresses, luxury leather handbags, and expensive French perfume. My father-in-law, Arthur Croft, was 68 years old. He was a man of remarkably few words, but whenever he chose to speak, the entire family fell into an immediate, practiced silence. My mother-in-law, Eleanor Croft, 64, possessed a voice as smooth and sweet as warm honey, but it was a honey often laced with invisible thorns. She never found it necessary to raise her voice. A single, deliberate look from head to toe, delivered with a faint, disappointed contraction of her brows, was enough to make anyone feel they had committed an unforgivable social transgression. It was a peculiar, almost artful talent. There were 3 Croft brothers in total. The eldest, Donovan, 43, had been aggressively groomed for corporate success since his early childhood. He ran a lucrative chain of high-end boutique stores that imported luxury cosmetics, organic health supplements, and boutique home goods from Australia. He was never seen without a gleaming gold watch on his wrist, and his conversation was a relentless, exhausting stream of profit margins, expansion capital, and market shares. The middle brother, Preston, 39, was a master of superficial flattery. His words were always soft, pliable, and smooth, like silk threads rather than practical cotton. My husband, Julian, 37, was the youngest. In the Croft household, however, being the youngest did not mean being cherished or shielded. To his parents, Julian was a frustrating anomaly, a visible flaw in the perfect family portrait they so desperately wished to display to the wealthy world. As a young man, he had outright refused the comfortable corporate desk job his father had arranged for him at an allied firm, openly admitting that he hated the idea of tailored suits, fake smiles, and sterile glass offices. Instead, he had enrolled in a vocational trade school to learn the mechanical complexities of industrial refrigeration systems. Over years of hard, physical labor, he had built his own small company servicing commercial cold storage facilities and agricultural produce dryers. I distinctly remember my father-in-law, Arthur, berating him years ago in front of the extended family during a holiday gathering. "This family has plenty of brains," Arthur had said, his voice tight and trembling with deep-seated disappointment. "What it lacks is basic obedience. You insist on making things unnecessarily hard for yourself and embarrassing this family by coming home covered in grime." Julian had simply bowed his head, staring silently at his shoes, never uttering a single word in his own defense. Eleanor, sighing theatrically for the benefit of anyone sitting nearby, would lament loud enough for the entire room to hear, "Other people's youngest sons are a blessing who bring pride to the family name. Ours just works manual labor and gives his parents endless sleepless nights." The first time I ever heard her say that, I felt a hot, visceral flash of anger burn through my chest. But under the dinner table, Julian had gently touched my knee, a silent, desperate plea that meant don't say anything, please. He was so accustomed to enduring their passive-aggressive cruelty that sometimes I truly couldn't tell if his quiet demeanor was a display of infinite patience, or just profound, spirit-crushing exhaustion. That particular evening, the family was gathered for an early Christmas Eve dinner. The long, polished mahogany table in the formal dining room groaned under the weight of rich, festive food. A golden brown roast turkey, a silver platter of glazed ham, green bean casserole, and a steaming dish of pot roast that I had spent the entire afternoon perfecting in the kitchen. Outside, the winter wind howled against the heavy glass panes, but inside, the crystal chandelier cast a warm, brilliant light over the room. To an outsider looking through the window, it would have appeared to be the absolute perfection of a loving family gathering. But in life, many things that look breathtakingly beautiful from a distance reveal their razor-sharp thorns the moment you draw close. Eleanor carved a thick slice of white turkey meat and placed it onto Donovan's china plate with exaggerated tenderness. "Eat up, my dear," she cooed softly. "You've been working entirely too hard with the expansion of the new stores. You look as though you've lost weight." Donovan smiled, exuding the effortless confidence of the favored child. "Just getting into fighting shape, Mom. We are about to open our newest location downtown. The high-value shipment from Australia is arriving just in time for the holiday shopping rush. It's going to be absolutely massive." Arthur nodded slowly, his cold eyes filling with genuine pride. That is precisely how a man does business. With expansive vision. That is what earns this family respect in the community. Preston immediately chimed in, eager to claim his share of the warm atmosphere. "Donovan is brilliant, Dad. Even I have a difficult time keeping up with his aggressive growth strategies. In today's volatile market, if you aren't building a massive brand online, you're practically finished. You have to ride the high-yield trends, or you get left behind in the dust." Eleanor beamed at her two eldest sons, her face lit up with satisfaction. Then, she turned her gaze toward me, her voice dropping into a tone of deceptively gentle concern. "You see, Alara, a man in this distinguished family needs to possess real ambition. What possible future is there in tinkering with heavy machinery covered in grease in some freezing, dusty warehouse?" I knew precisely who she was talking about, even if she refused to say his name. Julian kept his head down, quietly cutting his food without looking up. He reached over, placed a tender piece of the pot roast onto my plate, and whispered softly, "You should eat, Alara. It turned out completely perfect today." Just that one small, considerate sentence, uttered in the middle of a dinner table overflowing with grand boasts, financial arrogance, and mutual self-congratulation, made a painful lump form in my throat. A person might not be rich in flowery words or public accolades, but a warm meal quietly served at the right moment can mean infinitely more than a plate made of pure gold. Arthur set his crystal wine glass down onto the table with a firm click and looked directly at my husband. "Julian, how is your little company doing these days?" The entire table fell abruptly silent. My father-in-law rarely asked about Julian's business, except on the rare occasions when he sought to publicly dissect and criticize it. Julian looked up, his expression completely calm and even. "It's steady, Dad. We have a few major winter maintenance contracts for agricultural facilities in Joliet to close out the fiscal year. It's enough to cover our technicians' payroll, pay our taxes, and keep the service trucks running smoothly." Donovan let out a soft, mocking smirk. "Sounds decent enough, I suppose. Our little brother is always so quiet these days. I guess you're saving up a massive fortune and just keeping it a secret from the rest of us." Julian looked directly at his eldest brother, his voice remaining respectful despite the obvious provocation. "It's a small, practical operation, Donovan. The company's revenue goes directly toward the technicians' salaries, equipment maintenance, facility overhead, and taxes. There is truly nothing to brag about. Eleanor set her silver fork down onto her napkin, her voice turning unnaturally soft and sweet. I simply have to ask, my dear, have you had a significant number of commercial orders this past month? And the main workshop facility, is the lease registered under the company's corporate name, or is it held under your personal name? I'm only asking out of motherly curiosity, of course. We are family, after all. There is no need for secrets among blood. My hand, which was holding a silver soup spoon, froze instantly in mid-air. The question was posed with an air of polite, motherly concern, but it felt deeply unnatural. In the 6 years I had been their daughter-in-law, Eleanor Croft had never once asked if Julian was eating well, if he was physically exhausted from his 60-hour work weeks, or if his business was surviving the winter cold. Yet today, she was suddenly inquiring about commercial workshops, legal asset registrations, and corporate lease documentation. Julian answered slowly, weighing every single syllable before letting it leave his lips. The company employs a head accountant, Mom, and maintains its own official financial records. I don't keep those specific legal and administrative details memorized at the dinner table. Arthur's thick eyebrows furrowed into a sharp, threatening scowl. Is that the disrespectful tone you use to answer your own mother when she asks a simple question? Before Julian could respond and escalate the obvious confrontation, I forced a light, polite laugh, desperately trying to diffuse the suffocating tension in the room. Please understand, Dad. Julian is completely exhausted after working a grueling 12-hour day out in the cold at the workshop. He can easily look over the corporate files some other time and give you a much clearer, more detailed answer. Eleanor's cold gaze swept slowly over me. It was a fleeting, subtle glance, but it felt as chilling as a sharp draft blowing through a window left open in the dead of December. A daughter-in-law who knows how to defend her husband is certainly a loyal thing, Alara, she murmured, her voice dripping with venomous polite restraint. But a truly wise woman knows how to advise her husband to live with absolute loyalty and duty to his family. Blood is always thicker than water, my dear. Yes, Mom, I said softly, lowering my eyes to my plate to avoid her penetrating stare. I said the words out of long-ingrained habit, but deep in my heart, a disturbing question began to form. If that sacred blood is only ever valued by its immediate monetary worth, how is it any better than cold, dirty water? The holiday dinner continued, but I had completely lost what little appetite I had. Donovan talked animatedly with his father about his ambitious corporate strategies for the new store location, while Preston chimed in with well-timed jokes and agreement. Eleanor occasionally glanced over at my husband, but her expression was no longer the familiar, disappointed scowl I had grown accustomed to over the years. It was something far more terrifying, a sharp, calculating, and predatory kind of scrutiny. Late that night, back in the privacy of our upstairs bedroom, I stood near the window watching the rain beat against the glass while Julian unbuckled his watch and placed it neatly on the nightstand. Did you notice your mother acting unusually strange today, Julian? I asked softly, turning to face him. Suddenly showing an intense interest in your workshop, your contracts, and your company's legal structure. Julian remained completely silent for a long moment, staring down at his hands. When he finally looked up, his face was shadowed with a heavy, somber exhaustion. Just remember this one thing, Alara, he said, his voice dropping into a serious, hushed tone. If anyone in this house asks you about the company's financial paperwork, you tell them you know nothing. If anyone asks who legally owns the workshop, or the land it sits on, you tell them you don't know. I stepped closer to him, my heart quickening its beat. Julian, please tell me, is something terrible happening? He walked over to the window and pulled the heavy velvet curtains shut, blocking out the cold night. His voice remained remarkably soft, but his dark eyes held no trace of a smile. I'm not entirely sure yet. But in this house, when someone suddenly decides to be kind to me, it is almost always because they desperately need something I own. I felt a sudden, involuntary shiver run down my spine. Outside, the bare, dark branches of the old sycamore tree rustled loudly in the rising winter wind. From the downstairs living room, I could faintly hear Donovan's loud, booming laughter mingling with Eleanor's smooth voice, as she gave firm instructions to the domestic housekeeper. The grand mansion was still brilliantly illuminated, smelling richly of fresh pine needles, roasted meats, and sweet cinnamon, its walls proudly adorned with perfectly framed family portraits. But for the very first time in my 6 years as a Croft daughter-in-law, I no longer saw that stately home as a place of shelter. I saw it as a massive, breathtakingly beautiful box, sealed tight with high brick walls, sharp iron gates, and heavy oak doors. And deep inside its hidden corners, something toxic was quietly beginning to rot. The next morning, I was awake long before the winter sun had even begun to rise over the Chicago horizon. Outside, the groundskeeper was already making a loud, scraping racket, as he cleared patches of black ice and spread heavy salt across the freezing brick patio. The sharp, metallic scraping sound was incredibly chilling in the morning silence. I walked down to the quiet kitchen to prepare a large pot of hot oatmeal for the household, then quickly packed a sturdy, insulated lunchbox for Julian to take with him to the workshop. Julian rarely ate breakfast at home with his family, not because he disliked the food, but because every single time he sat at that formal table, someone would inevitably utter a passive-aggressive comment designed to chip away at his dignity. I handed him the warm lunchbox in the dimly lit hallway. "You're heading out exceptionally early today, Julian." He zipped up his heavy canvas work jacket and adjusted his scarf. "A few large produce dryers at a commercial farm facility out in Joliet require an immediate, emergency inspection," he explained, his breath visible in the chilly air. "They need them fully operational for their end-of-year agricultural shipments. If our team is late, it completely ruins their harvest schedule." I looked down at his hands as he pulled on his heavy leather work gloves. They were not smooth, pale, and pampered like Donovan's hands, nor were they soft like Preston's. Julian's knuckles were rough, calloused, and scarred from years of manual labor, his fingernails always trimmed exceptionally short to prevent them from catching in industrial machinery. Yet it was these very hands that had built a legitimate, honest business from scratch, starting from a single rented garage, 3 dedicated technicians, and an old service truck that frequently broke down on the highway. I had visited his main workshop facility only once, shortly after we were married. It was situated in a noisy, unglamorous industrial park where thick dust coated everything in the hot summer months, and heavy mud splattered your clothes during the winter rains. Yet, standing in the middle of that deafening roar of compressors and machinery, Julian's eyes had lit up with a brilliant, passionate fire, as if he were standing in the middle of a majestic empire. He had proudly pointed out every single corner of the facility to me. "That's the main compressor repair zone over there, Alara. And over here is our spare parts inventory. One day, if we work hard enough, I want to build a small, independent cold storage facility to rent out to local small farmers at cost, so they aren't forced to sell their hard-earned crops for pennies during a bumper harvest." I had teasingly replied back then, "Listen to you, talking like you're the ambitious CEO of a major multinational corporation." He had let out a warm, genuine laugh, wiping a streak of sweat from his forehead with his grease-stained sleeve. "CEO of what? I just hope I can pay my guys their fair wages on time at the end of every month, so no one under my roof has to go home to their family for Christmas with a long, sad face." A man who possessed that kind of profound, quiet integrity was a man of true character in my eyes. But in the eyes of his wealthy, status-obsessed family, he was still just the disappointing youngest son who smelled of motor oil and manual labor. Around noon that day, while I was sitting at my desk at the medical supply company in downtown Chicago, my phone began to vibrate on the blotter. The caller ID displayed my mother-in-law's name. Eleanor almost never called me during my professional working hours, so a cold knot of anxiety instantly tightened in my stomach the moment I saw her name flashing on the screen. "Hello, Mom," I said softly, pressing the phone tightly to my ear. Is everything okay? Alara, can you please leave the office and come home early this afternoon? Her smooth voice requested over the line. Is something wrong at the house? I asked, my pulse quickening. Nothing major, my dear. Your father-in-law simply wishes to have an early family dinner. Donovan has some urgent business matters to discuss with the family, and I need you here to assist me in the kitchen. She used the word assist, but I knew precisely what her demand meant. In the Croft household, a daughter-in-law was treated like an auxiliary piece of furniture, brought out and positioned when needed to complete the illusion of a harmonious family, then promptly pushed back into an out-of-the-way corner the moment she was no longer required. When I arrived at the Evanston mansion an hour later, Donovan's sleek, black luxury sedan was already parked in the driveway. Preston was standing near the front porch, speaking in a hushed, frantic tone into his phone, his face pale against the grey winter sky. I know. But the lenders are putting immense pressure on us right now. If we don't present the physical collateral documentation within 3 days, they are going to freeze the entire Australian import shipment at the port. We absolutely cannot let Mom and Dad discover the full extent of the shortfall. As I walked up the brick steps, Preston caught sight of me and immediately ended the call, a momentary flicker of pure panic crossing his features before he quickly forced a tight, artificial smile onto his face. Oh? Alara. You're back already. Did you get off work early today? Mom called the office and asked me to help prepare an early dinner, I replied smoothly, keeping my voice entirely neutral. Were you speaking with a business client? He waved his hand dismissively, though his eyes darted nervously toward the driveway. Oh, just the usual year-end chaos at the office, you know. Everyone is demanding their money, everyone wants their international shipments cleared immediately. It's an absolute mess. He let out a dry laugh, but his throat sounded completely parched. I didn't ask any further questions. In my professional experience as an accountant, people who accidentally let dangerous truths slip are most terrified of those who possess a good memory. And as an auditor, my entire career was built on remembering the exact numbers that others desperately wished to erase. Inside the kitchen, Eleanor was meticulously arranging expensive porcelain serving platters on the counter. When she saw me walk in, she did not ask me to start chopping vegetables as she usually did. Instead, she pulled out a wooden chair at the kitchen island and gestured for me to sit down. Alara. Tell me completely honestly. Is Julian's company doing well financially at the end of this year? I kept my eyes focused downward, nervously picking at a stray green onion on the counter, trying desperately to keep my breathing steady. Julian doesn't talk very much about his corporate accounts with me at home, Mom. He only mentions that his team is exceptionally busy with seasonal maintenance contracts. Eleanor watched me with a sharp, unblinking intensity. A husband and a wife should never keep financial secrets from one another, Alara. The woman of the household should always know precisely how much debt her husband carries, what liquid assets he possesses, and whose name is listed on the legal title deeds. I forced a faint, respectful smile onto my face. In our household, Julian manages his commercial business, and I manage my professional accounting job. I prefer not to meddle deeply in his corporate affairs. I'm afraid I wouldn't fully understand his technical operations, and would only make things more complicated for him. Eleanor's face hardened for a fraction of a second, her smooth features freezing into a mask of pure coldness, before she quickly forced her pleasant expression back into place. You are a sweet, gentle girl, Alara, but being far too gentle can be a dangerous disadvantage in this world. One day, if outside entities start asking serious questions, and you know absolutely nothing, it will reflect extraordinarily badly on your character. The words were delivered with the soft cadence of maternal advice, but they settled into the quiet room like a chilling threat, a deliberate warning that a day was rapidly approaching when outside entities would indeed be asking very dangerous questions. The dinner that evening was a much smaller affair than the holiday gathering, but the atmosphere inside the dining room was infinitely heavier. Arthur sat rigidly at the head of the long table, with Donovan positioned at his right hand and Preston at his left. Julian arrived home late, his heavy canvas coat still dusty from a long day out at the farm facilities. He had barely washed his hands at the hallway sink when his father called out to him in a stern, commanding tone. "Julian, step into my study for a moment." I stood near the kitchen doorway holding a heated platter of steamed vegetables, watching my husband's retreating back as he walked down the dimly lit hallway. He glanced back over his shoulder at me for a split second, his dark eyes silently telling me not to worry. But after 6 years of marriage, I knew that the more Julian tried to protect me from worry, the more terrifying the underlying reality actually was. Arthur's executive study was located directly adjacent to the main living room, its heavy, carved oak door left slightly ajar. I was not intentionally trying to eavesdrop, but in the quiet, drafty old house, the low, resonant murmur of the men's voices carried easily through the gap. "Brothers are brothers, Julian," Arthur's deep voice declared firmly. "When times are prosperous, everyone manages on their own. But when severe difficulties arise, family members must step up and support one another without hesitation. Donovan and Preston urgently need to secure a substantial short-term, commercial loan to maintain possession of that massive cosmetics shipment arriving from Australia. I want you to look at your company's accounts and see how much capital you can immediately provide to assist them." Julian's response was slow, measured, and completely firm. "Dad, my company's commercial bank accounts are not my personal piggy bank. If Donovan and Preston require a major capital injection, there must be a formal legal contract drafted, a clearly defined repayment schedule, and verifiable physical collateral pledged against the loan." Donovan let out a harsh, grating laugh that echoed unpleasantly into the hallway. "Listen to him. You sound as though you're dealing with total strangers, Julian. We are your blood brothers, and you're sitting there arrogantly demanding formal legal contracts and collateral from us." Julian's voice remained entirely level. "It is precisely because we are family that the financial terms must be completely transparent, Donovan. When money becomes murky among relatives, relationships are permanently destroyed." Preston quickly jumped into the conversation, his tone sickeningly placating. "Julian, please understand, this is merely a temporary bridge loan. Once the imported goods are cleared and sold after the holiday rush, we will repay every single cent with interest. Just give us a hand here, brother. We will never forget your generosity. How much liquid capital can you realistically release right now?" Julian was silent for a few agonizing seconds. "How much do you urgently need?" he finally asked. The room fell completely silent. Then, Donovan's voice answered, low and intensely strained, $2 million. For now. Standing outside in the hallway, I nearly dropped the heavy porcelain platter in my hands. $2 million, spoken from Donovan's lips as casually as if he were asking to borrow a lawnmower. Julian remained silent for a long, heavy moment. Then, his quiet voice broke the stillness. "I can't do that." Arthur's voice instantly hardened into pure ice. "Do you mean you can't, or you won't, Julian?" "Both, Dad," Julian replied steadily. "My company has active commercial orders to fulfill, technicians' salaries to pay, taxes due, and heavy equipment leases to service. I cannot simply pull $2 million out of an operating business based on a vague promise of brothers helping brothers." Donovan's tone turned menacingly cold. "Look at you, so high-principled now. When this family paid for your expensive private education growing up, did Dad demand a legal contract from you?" Hearing that cheap, manipulative accusation made my chest tighten with deep indignation. Julian's response was quiet, but held an unbreakable steel. "I am endlessly grateful to Mom and Dad for raising me. But a parent's sacrifice in raising a child cannot be converted into a perpetual right for my brothers to seize my business assets whenever they mismanaged their own affairs. Suddenly, the heavy oak door flew open with a bang. Donovan strode out into the hallway, his face dark with suppressed rage. He caught sight of me standing near the kitchen doorway with the platter of vegetables, his eyes narrowing into sharp slits as he sneered, "Our sweet little sister-in-law is quite the attentive listener, isn't she? It seems everyone in this house possesses their own special, sneaky skill." I bowed my head slightly, keeping my voice completely calm. "I was simply bringing the side dishes to the dining table, Donovan. I didn't mean to overhear your conversation." Donovan stepped closer to me, leaning in until his face was only inches from mine, his voice dropping into a razor-sharp whisper. "Since your ears are so sharp, Alara, you should remember to give your husband some wise advice. Tell him not to be so selfishly calculating when his own blood family desperately needs him. In this dangerous world, being entirely too clever can sometimes significantly shorten a man's life." I looked up, staring directly into his eyes. The sinister words sent a violent chill straight down my spine. Donovan was still wearing a faint, superficial smile, but his eyes were completely dead, void of any humor, warmth, or familial affection. Late that night, after the rest of the household had retired to their respective bedrooms, Julian sat at his small writing desk in our room, opening a worn leather notebook. I walked over and placed a warm glass of water beside his hand. "What is this really about, Julian?" $2 million. He wasn't surprised that I knew the figure. He simply let out a long, exhausted sigh, rubbing his tired eyes with his calloused hands. "It isn't just about $2 million, Alara. That $2 million is merely a small piece of cloth they are desperately trying to use to cover a massive, gaping hole." I sat down on the chair beside him, leaning in close. "You already know what they are involved in, don't you?" He closed the notebook slowly and looked at me for a long, somber moment. "Alara, from this exact moment forward, if Mom, Donovan, or Preston asks you anything regarding the company's financial ledgers, my workshop properties, or my digital signatures and commercial insurance policies, you give them only one answer." "I don't know," I whispered softly. He nodded firmly. "Correct? You know nothing. And even if you happen to discover something, you pretend with all your heart that you know nothing." I reached out and took his hand. It felt noticeably colder than usual. "Julian, are you afraid?" He looked toward the window, watching the freezing rain beat relentlessly against the glass. "I'm not afraid of them asking me for a commercial loan, Alara. I am terrified because they have completely stopped viewing me as a human being to ask." I did not fully comprehend the dark depth of his words at that precise moment. It was only much later, when our world completely imploded, that I realized a horrifying truth: when certain ruthless families are pushed into a desperate financial corner, they no longer look at their own kin as brothers or sons. They look across the room and see only an insurance policy payout, a property title deed, or a forged signature that can be traded to guarantee their own survival. It was December 22nd. The persistent Chicago drizzle had been falling since early morning, not a heavy downpour, but a relentless, freezing mist that clung to everything like a sullen grudge. I was sitting at my desk at the office, having just finished auditing a long ledger of year-end accounts, when my phone buzzed with a text message from Julian, heading to the workshop facility to personally inspect the commercial produce dryers. "We'll be home in time for dinner. Please save me a portion of that pot roast." I smiled softly as I read his words. To the outside world, Julian appeared stoic, quiet, and entirely unromantic. But with me, he possessed his own gentle, unspoken language of love. There were no grand displays of expensive flowers, no candlelit dinners, and no hollow, poetic declarations, just the quiet thoughtfulness of remembering my favorite meals, reminding me to bundle up warmly when the temperature dropped, and silently brewing me a hot cup of tea when he saw I was stressed from work. The true strength of a marriage is rarely found in grand, public vows, but in the quiet comfort of a warm meal saved for you in a dimly lit kitchen. A little after 4 o'clock that afternoon, my phone rang violently. The screen displayed the name of Mike, Julian's trusted workshop foreman. The moment I pressed the receiver to my ear, a chaotic, terrifying wall of sound exploded through the speaker, the howling of cold wind, shouts of panicked men, and the heavy patter of rain. Alara. Please, stay calm and listen to me very carefully. Mike shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic. It's Julian. He had a terrible fall at the workshop. We are loading him into an ambulance right now. I shot up from my office chair so violently that my lower back slammed against the heavy metal filing cabinet behind me with a loud, echoing bang. A fall. How is he? Is he conscious, Mike? Tell me everything right now. Mike's voice was shaking uncontrollably. He said he suddenly felt violently dizzy while standing near the upper level, then he missed a step on the steel mezzanine staircase. He fell backward and hit his head hard on the concrete floor below. At first, he was able to faintly murmur your name, but then he went completely unconscious. The paramedics are working on him right now. My ears began to ring violently, the bright numbers on my computer screen blurring into a meaningless smear of light. I grabbed my purse and coat, practically running out of the corporate office while using an app to hail a ride. The rain outside was light, but the holiday traffic across downtown Chicago was an absolute nightmare, jammed with frantic shoppers. The car crawled forward at an agonizing pace. Everyone around me had their own joyous holiday destination, their own happy purpose. I was the only one trapped in a suffocating metal cage, my heart pounding against my ribs so violently I thought it would shatter my chest. I called Mike back 3 separate times during the agonizing drive. Each time, he confirmed they were racing toward the emergency room under flashing lights. I desperately asked him if Julian had eaten or drunk anything unusual before the fall, or if anyone had visited the workshop facility that afternoon. Mike was completely silent for a few terrifying seconds over the line before answering hesitantly, well. Earlier this afternoon, Rick Dalton, Donovan's personal driver, came by the workshop. He brought over a boxed lunch and a fresh fruit smoothie. He specifically told us that your mother-in-law, Eleanor, had prepared it and sent it over for Julian. My blood ran completely cold in my veins. Mom sent it. Yeah, that's exactly what Rick said, Mike replied, his tone laced with confusion. We all thought it was really strange, honestly, since his family almost never sends food out to the industrial park. But when Julian heard it was from his mother, he smiled, thanked Rick, and drank some of it. I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. An vivid image of Eleanor's cold face from the night before flashed through my mind, her unsettling questions about the workshop, the corporate legal papers, and my husband's somber warning, if anyone asks, you tell them you know nothing. When the car finally pulled up to the hospital emergency entrance, I practically sprinted through the sliding glass doors into the chaotic waiting room. My coat was soaked through with freezing rain, my wet hair stuck messily to my face, my chest heaving with ragged gasps of air. Mike was standing near the double doors leading to the trauma bays, his heavy work coveralls stained with dark mud. The moment his eyes met mine, he looked down at the floor, unable to maintain eye contact. Alara. I grabbed his forearm with a frantic grip. Where is he? Where is my husband? The trauma doctors are with him right now, Mike whispered, his voice trembling. When the paramedics brought him in, he was responding slightly to deep pain stimuli. But he wouldn't open his eyes or react when we called his name. I rushed over to the small, square glass window set into the double doors of the trauma room. Inside, under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights, Julian lay motionlessly on a stainless steel gurney. His head was wrapped in thick white bandages, his face terrifyingly pale, a tangle of monitoring wires and 4 lines hooked to his quiet body. Just that morning, he had held my hand in the hallway and reminded me to save him dinner. Now, he lay completely still in a cold, sterile room. I desperately wanted to burst into tears, but the knot in my throat was so agonizingly tight that not a single tear would come. Sometimes, when you are struck by absolute, paralyzing terror, the body forgets how to cry. You simply stand there, a hollow, breathing shell facing a nightmare. A young trauma physician stepped out of the room, pulling off his latex gloves. Who here is the immediate family of Julian Croft? I am. I blurted out instantly, stepping forward. I am his wife. The doctor spoke in a slow, carefully measured tone. The patient has suffered a severe concussion resulting from a high-impact blow to the temporal region of his head. He is currently exhibiting post-traumatic impairment of consciousness and requires immediate, intensive neurological monitoring. We cannot offer a definitive long-term prognosis yet, but for the moment, there is no immediate indication for emergency neurosurgery. Is his life in immediate danger? I begged, my voice cracking. His vital signs are relatively stable for the time being, but he remains in a precarious state. The family must try to remain calm. He will be admitted to the intensive care unit for close observation, and any unnecessary physical movement must be strictly avoided. I nodded repeatedly, as if nodding fast enough would somehow magically make my husband wake up. As I was standing at the admissions desk filling out the emergency intake forms with trembling hands, I called the Evanston mansion. Eleanor answered on the second ring. The moment I informed her that Julian had suffered a severe accident at the workshop and was in the hospital, the line went completely silent for a beat. Then, a dramatic, loud cry exploded from her lips. Oh, merciful God! How could such a tragic thing happen? Where on earth were you, Alara, that you allowed your own husband to get hurt like this? Her very first reaction was not to ask if her youngest son was breathing, but to aggressively shift blame onto me. I knew it was not the time to be sensitive to her toxicity, but her cruel words still stung like a physical slap across the face. I am at the hospital right now, Mom, I said, suppressing my anger. The trauma doctors say he needs to be admitted for intensive neurological observation. Which hospital is he at? She demanded. Your father and I are getting into the car right now. Less than 20 minutes later, Donovan arrived at the emergency department, appearing even before his parents. He was wearing an immaculate black trench coat, his hair perfectly styled, a high-end phone pressed tightly to his ear. He strode directly past me, as if I were invisible, walking straight up to the head nurse's station. Which room is Julian Croft in? He asked crisply. Has the attending physician completed the official accident intake report yet? What specific legal documents are required to initiate a claim through his commercial health and personal accident insurance policies? I was standing less than 2 feet away from him. My blood ran completely cold in my veins. Donovan. I called out, my voice shaking with indignation. Julian is still lying in the emergency trauma bay. Why on earth are you asking about insurance paperwork right now? He turned slowly to face me, his confident expression faltering for a microsecond before smoothing back into a polished mask of executive composure. My dear sister-in-law, I am simply taking care of the necessary administrative paperwork so the family can handle these massive hospital bills efficiently. In a severe crisis like this, someone in this family has to remain completely level-headed and practical. We can't all simply fall apart emotionally, can we? His words sounded entirely reasonable on the surface, but his cold, calculating level-headedness terrified me to my core. To exhibit such absolute composure in the immediate face of your own brother's life-threatening suffering was not a display of inner strength. It was the undeniable behavior of a man who had already memorized a carefully prepared script in his head. Arthur and Eleanor arrived shortly after. The exact moment Eleanor caught sight of me sitting on the waiting room bench, she began to sob dramatically. But before a single genuine tear could even form in her eyes, she reached out and grabbed my wrist, her grip shockingly tight and aggressive. Alara! What precisely did Julian eat or drink at the workshop before he fell? Do you know? Mike told me that Rick Dalton brought a boxed lunch and a fruit smoothie to the workshop, claiming it was sent directly from you, Mom, I replied, staring directly into her eyes. Eleanor's hand flinched violently, a tiny, almost imperceptible jerk of her fingers. Had I not been standing directly beside her, watching her every move, I would have missed it entirely. But I felt it. She immediately released my wrist, as if burned, and turned sharply toward Donovan. Where is Rick right now? Donovan frowned, his eyes darting toward the exit. I don't know, Mom. He likely drove back home after dropping off the food. Just then, my eyes caught sight of a figure standing at the far end of the long hospital hallway near a vending machine. It was Rick Dalton, wearing his gray jacket and holding a motorcycle helmet, his face pale and nervous. The exact instant his eyes met mine across the corridor, he quickly looked down at his phone, turned on his heel, and began walking rapidly toward the exit doors. Rick! I called out loudly. He paused for half a second, his shoulders tense, but he didn't turn around. Donovan stepped smoothly into my path, physically blocking my line of sight, his voice low and firm. I will handle Rick later, Alara. Let us focus entirely on Julian's health for now. I looked at Donovan's smooth face, then at Eleanor's dramatic handkerchief, and finally toward the empty hallway where Rick had just vanished. The overwhelming fear that had consumed my heart since 4 o'clock began to transform into something entirely different, something icy, sharp, and dangerously clear. A short while later, the attending physician permitted me to step inside the trauma room alone for a few short minutes. Julian lay completely motionlessly on the high bed, his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling in heavy, labored rhythms. I sat on the edge of the metal chair, gently taking his cold hand in mine. The rough calluses on his fingers still smelled faintly of industrial motor oil and cold steel. I leaned close to his bandaged ear and whispered softly, Julian, it's me. It's Alara. I'm right here beside you. If you can hear my voice, please, just try to give my hand a little squeeze. I haven't even reheated that pot roast for dinner yet. Don't you dare think about skipping out on our meal. I tried to make a gentle joke, just as I always did when he was stressed, but the words had barely left my trembling lips before hot tears spilled over my eyelashes and fell onto the back of his cold hand. This time, he didn't squeeze my hand back. He didn't offer a subtle, comforting wink. He didn't open his eyes and tease me that I had used too much salt in the cooking. There was only the steady, monotonous, chilling beep, beep, beep of the heart rate monitor beside the bed, a sound so terrifyingly constant it felt like a countdown clock. Through the square glass window of the door, I could see Donovan standing in the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear, his back turned to the room. I couldn't hear his full conversation, only isolated, terrifying fragments, accident documentation, perfect timing, clear the policy. Arthur stood silently beside Eleanor, his face like carved stone. And my mother-in-law stood watching her youngest son through the glass window, her expression so profoundly unreadable that I didn't dare to guess what dark thoughts were passing through her mind. People often speak of tragic freak accidents, of random bolts of lightning striking from a clear blue sky. But that chilly December afternoon, as I recalled the fruit smoothie that had suddenly vanished, Rick's frantic evasion, and Donovan inquiring about insurance payouts before even asking if his own brother was conscious, I began to comprehend a horrifying reality. Some violent storms do not simply happen by chance. Someone deliberately opens the window. And sometimes, those very people are standing right on the porch, patiently waiting for the deadly wind to blow. The next morning, I woke up slumped awkwardly over a hard plastic chair in the cold hospital corridor. I hadn't been asleep for more than 20 minutes, when I was abruptly jolted awake by the heavy sound of approaching footsteps echoing against the linoleum floor. Opening my tired eyes, I saw Arthur, Eleanor, and Donovan standing near the nurse's station, engaged in an intense, hushed conversation with a physician wearing a white coat. I stood up immediately, smoothing down my crumpled coat as I walked over. Dad, Mom, what is happening? Is there news about Julian? Arthur turned to face me, his expression cold and completely devoid of warmth. The family has made the formal decision to discharge Julian from this facility and bring him back home to the mansion to be cared for privately. I stared at him in absolute shock, wondering if my exhausted mind was playing tricks on me. Bring him home. But the trauma specialist explicitly stated yesterday that he requires intensive neurological observation in a hospital environment for at least a week. Eleanor let out a dramatic, weary sigh, dabbing the corner of her eye with an embroidered handkerchief. Oh, Alara, look at this dreadful place. It is so hideously crowded, noisy, and chaotic. Strangers coming and going constantly. What if my poor boy catches a dangerous staph infection in these dirty wards? We have more than enough financial means to hire top-tier private doctors and full-time nurses. He will receive vastly superior, personalized care in the comfort of his own family home. I looked through the glass window into the room. Julian was still completely motionlessly, his head wrapped in thick bandages, his eyes tightly closed. I fought with everything I had to maintain a calm, respectful tone. Mom, I am deeply uncomfortable with this decision. Can we please, at the very least, allow him to remain here under specialist care for a few more days until the neurologists are completely confident he is stable? Donovan cut me off aggressively, his voice dry and commanding. My dear sister-in-law, you are an internal accountant, not a medical doctor. Mom and Dad have already finalized this decision with the administration. At the mansion, it is quiet, pristine, and he will have dedicated medical professionals monitoring him around the clock. Your only job right now is to step up and take proper care of your husband. The phrase, your only job right now is to step up and take proper care of him, was delivered with a polite, casual cadence, but it settled onto my shoulders with the crushing weight of a lead coffin. I turned frantically to the attending physician, who had so clearly explained the severe risks of brain swelling the previous afternoon. The doctor frowned slightly, looking deeply uncomfortable under Arthur's stern gaze. From a strictly institutional standpoint, we still strongly recommend that the patient remain hospitalized for continued neurological monitoring. However, if the legal family explicitly demands a home discharge and formally commits to providing round-the-clock private medical oversight, the hospital will issue the necessary home care discharge guidelines. Doctor, I said urgently, stepping forward. I am his legal wife. I am his immediate next of kin, and I am telling you that I want my husband to stay in this hospital. Arthur's voice dropped into a terrifyingly cold, authoritative register. You are indeed his wife, Alara, but I am his legally designated medical proxy. He reached inside his heavy wool coat, pulled out an official, notarized legal document, and held it out before my face. Julian formally signed this durable medical power of attorney 2 years ago, granting me absolute legal authority over all his medical decisions in the event that he becomes incapacitated. We are taking my son home today. I stood completely speechless, staring at Julian's distinct signature on the legal document. My mind was spinning out of control. In this cruel world, there are moments when possessing the absolute moral high ground means nothing against a calculated piece of paper backed by high-priced lawyers. The hospital administration reviewed the notarized power of attorney, nodded politely, and immediately stepped back. My fundamental legal rights, as a devoted wife, had been completely erased by a single, pre-planned document. By noon, Julian was being loaded into a private transport ambulance to be moved back to the Evanston mansion. As the vehicle pulled up to the iron front gate of the property, several curious neighbors peeked out from behind their sheer window curtains. Some called out genuine words of sympathy, while others were merely satisfying their sensational curiosity. Eleanor stood on the porch, an expensive cashmere shawl draped dramatically over her shoulders, her voice trembling with just enough performative emotion for the entire street to hear. Oh, my poor, tragic youngest son. So vibrant and healthy just yesterday, and now completely confined to a bed. I walked silently behind the medical gurney, my hands clenching the fabric of my coat so tightly my fingers cramped. I utterly loathed the horrifying way she uttered those words, confined to a bed, as though my husband's ultimate fate had been permanently sealed the very moment his body was carried through those iron gates. The grand living room of the mansion had been frantically rearranged in our absence. The heavy, antique wooden furniture had been pushed aggressively against the perimeter walls, and the plush red Persian rug had been rolled up and stored away. In its place stood a brand-new, sterile hospital bed equipped with side rails. Positioned directly beside it was a locked metal medicine cabinet, and 4-drip stand, a digital heart rate monitor, stacks of clean white towels, a stainless steel basin, and a box of disposable medical gloves. The familiar, luxurious scent of sandalwood incense that usually filled the mansion was completely overpowered by the sharp, chemical smell of industrial antiseptic. I stared at the room where, just a few short days ago, we had all sat together for a festive holiday dinner, now grimly transformed into a cold sickroom. On the primary wall, the formal family portrait taken on Arthur's 65th birthday still hung in its gilded frame. In the photograph, Donovan stood proudly beside his father, Preston stood beside his mother, and I was positioned on the extreme outer edge, partially obscured by a large decorative houseplant. I used to view that photograph as merely sad. Now, gazing at it in the cold light of the sickroom, I recognized it for what it truly was, an omen. That very afternoon, Donovan brought a private physician, Dr. Marcus Thorne, to the mansion. Dr. Thorne was a man in his early 50s, short, balding, wearing gold-rimmed spectacles, speaking in a remarkably slow, clinical tone. "This is Dr. Thorne," Donovan introduced smoothly. "A distinguished colleague of mine who possesses extensive experience in monitoring patients suffering from severe, long-term cognitive impairment. Moving forward, he will be taking complete charge of Julian's medical care here at the house. Have you thoroughly reviewed his hospital trauma charts and neurological scans, Doctor?" I asked immediately, stepping into his path. Dr. Thorne adjusted his gold spectacles, nodding slowly. "I have indeed reviewed the preliminary charts, Mrs. Croft. I must be completely frank with you, your husband's clinical condition is exceptionally complex. Post-traumatic impairment of consciousness can frequently become indefinite. The family must prepare themselves mentally for a long, static journey. But at the hospital, the trauma specialists never said he was in a vegetative state, or that he was incapable of recovering." I pressed, desperately clinging to every word. "Did they say that, Doctor?" Dr. Thorne looked down at me over the rims of his glasses, his tone completely flat and void of empathy. "In the field of high-level neurology, Mrs. Croft, we strictly avoid absolute promises. What is clinically relevant right now is that the patient is currently almost completely non-communicative, entirely unable to swallow solid nourishment, and incapable of exercising rational decision-making regarding his own care. We must structure his home management strictly around those clinical realities. Almost completely." Those two specific words were incredibly dangerous. They were not a definitive medical verdict, but they were more than enough for a predatory family to ruthlessly exploit. They did not completely close the door on hope, but they ensured it remained tightly shut. From that day forward, Dr. Thorne began maintaining a thick, leather-bound medical chart on the bedside table. Every time he conducted a cursory examination of Julian, he would spend an exaggerated amount of time writing detailed clinical notes. I managed to catch a quick glimpse of his handwriting one afternoon. "Patient exhibits profound, sustained impairment of consciousness, minimal response to external stimuli, requires absolute 24-hour family supervision for all personal care, clinically non-lucid to execute legal or financial decisions." "Doctor," I asked, my voice trembling slightly, "what if he begins to show clear signs of regaining full consciousness?" Dr. Thorne paused his writing, looking up slowly. "If such an unlikely event occurs, Mrs. Croft, the family will naturally notify me immediately. However, I strongly advise you, as his primary caregiver, not to nourish unrealistic emotional hopes. False hope in these severe cases invariably leads to catastrophic psychological collapse for the caregiver. His words sounded like a compassionate warning on the surface, but they felt like a bucket of freezing ice water thrown violently into my face. That evening, Eleanor began making phone calls to distant relatives and high society acquaintances. Sitting beside Julian's bed, gently wiping his cold hands with a damp cloth, I could hear her melodramatic voice echoing from the nearby hallway. Yes, tragically, my youngest boy, Julian, is practically in a vegetative state now. The private neurological specialist confirmed it is exceptionally grave. We are all relying heavily on poor Lara to care for him at home. I squeezed the washcloth in my hand until my knuckles hurt. Not a single board-certified doctor had ever stated in writing that my husband was in a vegetative state. Yet, from my mother-in-law's lips, it had instantly become an undeniable public truth, broadcast to the entire world. Words cost nothing to utter, but certain calculated words, once spoken aloud, can steal an innocent person's entire future. That night, I did not sleep for a single second. Every 2 hours, I gently refreshed the warm cloth on Julian's pale forehead. I methodically massaged his arms and legs just as the physical therapist had instructed, terrified that his muscles would atrophy in the bed. I carefully fed him small spoonfuls of thin broth, waiting with agonizing patience for his throat to swallow, which he did extraordinarily slowly. Occasionally, a small drop of broth would spill from the corner of his mouth. I would tenderly wipe it away and try again. I leaned down until my lips were inches from his ear, whispering, "Julian, can you hear me? If you can hear my voice, please, just blink your eyes for me. I promise I won't make you do the dishes for an entire month if you wake up." "Okay." I tried desperately to force a light joke. On any normal day, he would have instantly retorted that I was always trying to trick him into unfair household contracts. But he remained completely motionlessly. His eyelids didn't flutter. His hand didn't squeeze mine. There was only the rhythmic, soul-crushing beep, 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 of the monitor beside the bed, a sound so terrifyingly constant it felt like a bell tolling in an empty church. Hot tears spilled over my cheeks and fell onto his wrist. I quickly wiped them away with my sleeve, terrified that if he could somehow still feel, my grief would make him sad. People often say that marriage is a sacred bond for a lifetime. But it is only when your husband lies before you, unable to speak, unable to see you, unable to react, that you truly comprehend the terrifying, beautiful weight of that bond. The following morning, Eleanor introduced a young woman into the room. "Alara, this is Chloe Grant. I have retained her as a private nursing assistant to aid you in caring for Julian. You are still young and completely unaccustomed to managing severe illness. It is far better to have a dedicated professional by your side." Chloe was a woman in her late 20s, possessing a small frame, her brown hair pulled tightly back into a neat ponytail. She was soft-spoken and extraordinarily polite. "Hello, Mrs. Croft. I will be assisting you in monitoring Mr. Croft's daily condition." I felt a momentary wave of relief at the prospect of having actual medical assistance. But that relief vanished the exact moment I noticed that Chloe was carrying not just a standard medical bag, but a thick, black leather-bound logbook. She placed the heavy logbook on the table beside the bed, opened to the very first page, and carefully drew neat vertical columns with a ruler. Time of medication. Specific intervention. Administering party. Patient clinical status. Verified signature. Eleanor stood beside her, her voice as smooth and sweet as a lullaby. "Moving forward, Alara, every single detail regarding Julian's daily care must be recorded in absolute black and white. It isn't that I don't trust your devotion, my dear, but when a tragedy this severe occurs within a prominent family, it is always best to maintain flawless legal documentation." I looked at the black logbook, then at my husband lying motionless under the covers. For some terrifying reason, in that quiet moment, it no longer felt like a medical care log. It felt like a legal ledger patiently waiting to record a crime. From the day Chloe arrived, the grand living room was never quiet again, not because of meaningful family conversation, but because of the relentless, scratching sound of her pen moving across paper. I gently wiped Julian's face. Chloe wrote it down. I refreshed his warm towel. Chloe wrote it down. I helped him swallow 2 tiny spoonfuls of water. Chloe wrote it down. Sometimes, I would simply adjust his pillow to make him more comfortable, and when I turned around, Chloe would already be hunched over the table, writing furiously, as if she were terrified of missing a single detail. At first, I tried to convince myself that a good nurse is simply a thorough nurse. But the more I quietly observed her entries, the more deeply disturbing the phrasing became. Chloe was not merely documenting times and routine actions, she was recording them with remarkably specific, loaded terminology. Alara Vance directly administered broth. Alara Vance directly performed patient hygiene. Alara Vance directly administered daily medication from prepared tray. I frowned deeply when my eyes caught the line regarding the medication. Chloe, you are the one who physically retrieves the daily medication from the locked cabinet, or Dr. Thorne prepares it himself. Why on earth did you write down that I directly administered it to my husband? Her pen paused mid-sentence. She forced a quick, nervous smile onto her face. Well, you are Mr. Croft's wife, Mrs. Croft. You spend the most time directly at his bedside. I simply recorded it that way to be completely thorough for the family records. Thorough is vastly different from inaccurate, Chloe, I said, my voice firm. I only ever hand my husband what is explicitly passed to me by you or the doctor. The specific type of medication and the exact dosages are prepared entirely by you too. Chloe looked down at the floor, her fingers twitching. Yes, I will correct the entry. She said she would correct it, but then she simply turned to a fresh page without striking out or initialing the previous line. It was a subtle thing, but my career as an auditor had taught me an absolute rule: an uncorrected error on a ledger today becomes undeniable evidence tomorrow. That evening, Dr. Thorne stopped by the mansion for his daily check. He checked Julian's vitals, then sat down at the table to write in the official medical chart. Eleanor stood rigidly beside him, her arms tightly crossed over her chest, asking, "Is there any noticeable clinical improvement in his condition today, doctor?" Dr. Thorne adjusted his gold spectacles. "The patient's neurological responsiveness remains exceptionally poor, Mrs. Croft. The family must continue to monitor him with extreme vigilance. In particular, the primary caregiver must record every single intervention with total clarity, so as to prevent any tragic complications later, where the precise cause cannot be legally traced." The specific words, "prevent complications where the cause cannot be legally traced," sent an icy shiver straight through my spine. Eleanor turned to me immediately, her voice lowering into a sharp, commanding tone. "You heard the specialist, Alara. Caring for your husband is not merely about emotional devotion. You must be extraordinarily cautious. You must be entirely responsible." "Yes, Mom," I said softly, keeping my voice level. "I am being exceptionally cautious." She stared at me, her eyes completely cold. "I certainly hope so, my dear. Because one never knows, with a patient in such a precarious state, a single spoonful of broth going down the wrong pipe, a single misidentified pill, or a single improper movement can result in sudden, fatal complications. At that critical point, flawless written records will be the only thing that protects the innocent." Donovan walked into the room at that exact moment, setting his leather briefcase on the couch. He let out a cold, condescending sneer. "Mom is completely right, Alara. Just sign the daily care log entries like a good wife. If you are entirely innocent of any wrongdoing, what could you possibly fear from black and white paper?" That phrase again. I looked at Donovan, at his polished, composed executive demeanor, speaking with the absolute authority of the eldest brother. But his smooth words felt like an open steel cage, designed to subtly pressure me into walking inside of my own free will. I picked up the heavy black logbook from the table and slowly flipped through the pages. My eyes caught entries that Chloe had written for events that hadn't even occurred yet. 7:30 p.m. Alara Vance directly administered evening sedative to patient as instructed. But it was currently only 6:15 p.m. I pointed directly to the line. Donovan. Mom, this entry is logged for 7:30 p.m., but it isn't even 7 p.m. yet. I haven't administered anything to Julian. The atmosphere inside the room instantly turned suffocatingly heavy. Chloe's face went completely pale. Eleanor shot her a quick, razor-sharp glance, then forced a light, dismissive laugh. Oh, the poor nurse simply made a silly clerical error with the time, Alara. It is so easy to get confused when you are monitoring a sick patient all day long. I looked directly at Chloe. If it is a simple clerical error, Chloe, then please cross out the line entirely, rewrite the correct time, and sign your full legal name to the correction right here in front of everyone. Chloe picked up her pen, her hand trembling so violently she could barely hold it. Suddenly, Donovan stepped closer, his tone turning sharply aggressive. Why are you being so utterly dramatic, Alara? It is a single mistaken timestamp on a log sheet. You are acting as though you have uncovered a grand murder conspiracy. I maintained my composure, looking him straight in the eye. Donovan, you yourself stated seconds ago that black and white paper is what matters. If it is written in black and white, then it should never be false. Donovan stared down at me, the fake smile slowly evaporating from his face, replaced by a cold, menacing stare. You have gotten remarkably sharp lately, haven't you, sister-in-law? I closed the black logbook with a soft thud. I am an auditor, Donovan. I am trained to scrutinize numbers and words. My firm response caused Preston, who had been lingering nervously near the dining room doorway, to let out a brief, involuntary chuckle. But the sound died instantly when Donovan turned his terrifying glare upon him. Preston cleared his throat nervously and quickly retreated out onto the patio to pretend to take a phone call. Later that night, after Dr. Thorne had departed, Eleanor brought a covered china bowl of thick beef broth into the room. Feed this to Julian, Alara, she instructed, setting it on the bedside table. The doctor noted he requires substantial protein nourishment. I looked down at the dark broth. It smelled rich, with thin slices of fresh ginger floating on the surface. Who prepared this soup, Mom? I asked quietly. I had the kitchen staff prepare it specially, she replied, her eyes narrowing. Why do you ask? Are you implying that I would poison my own son? The heavy question was uttered with a quiet, dramatic cadence, but it felt as though a dark curtain had been drawn across the room. I didn't mean that at all, Mom, I replied quickly. I was simply asking so I can document the exact ingredients in the logbook correctly. Eleanor smiled, though her eyes remained entirely cold. Good. It seems you are finally learning the importance of proper documentation. I gently propped Julian's upper body up with pillows and began feeding him the warm broth, one agonizingly slow spoonful at a time. Chloe stood nearby, holding her smartphone in her hand. As I brought a spoon to my husband's pale lips, I heard a tiny, distinct sound, click. Chloe had surreptitiously taken a photograph of me feeding him. I turned my head sharply toward her. What are you taking photographs of, Chloe? She flinched, stepping back. Oh? I am simply documenting the daily care process for the family. Documenting for whom, exactly? Chloe bit her lip nervously, but before she could answer, Eleanor spoke up from the doorway. For the family, Alara. Your husband is gravely ill. Every single aspect of his care must be completely transparent. I set the china bowl down on the table. For the very first time since entering that house 6 years ago, I looked directly into my mother-in-law's eyes without averting my gaze. Transparency is a wonderful thing, Mom. But if you are going to take photographs of me caring for Julian, I want to know precisely who those photographs are being sent to, and what they will be used for in the future. I do not want a simple, innocent photograph to be twisted into something sinister later on. Donovan scoffed loudly from the couch. My dear sister-in-law, you are thinking entirely too far ahead. I am simply following the wise advice given to me by this distinguished family, to be exceptionally careful, I replied smoothly. Eleanor said nothing more. But in that long, heavy silence, I knew with absolute certainty that in her eyes, I was no longer the quiet, submissive daughter-in-law who only knew how to bow her head and obey. Night fell over Chicago. I sat beside Julian's bed, pulling out my phone to review the secret audio recordings I had made on my voice recorder app earlier that afternoon. The voices of Eleanor, Donovan, and Dr. Thorne mingled together in chilling detail. I did not know if those recordings would ever be legally admissible, but at the very least, they confirmed a vital truth: my terrifying sense of unease was not a product of exhaustion-fueled paranoia. Around 11 o'clock that night, I walked down the quiet hallway to the kitchen to fetch a glass of warm water. As I passed the dark laundry room near the basement stairs, I heard Chloe's panicked voice whispering frantically into her phone. I recorded it, but Mrs. Croft made me cross out the entry. Yes, I know. I am doing exactly what Donovan instructed me to do. But I am terrified. I stood frozen behind the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. Chloe paused, listening to the person on the other end, before continuing in a trembling, tearful voice, Yes. I will try to force her to sign the backdated pages tomorrow, but what if she refuses to sign? What do I do then? I couldn't hear the voice on the other end of the line. I only saw Chloe quickly wipe tears from her eyes, end the call, and head back toward her room. I walked back into the sick room and looked down at my husband lying motionless under the dim yellow light, his cheeks already noticeably hollowed after just a few days in that bed. I sat down on the chair, gently reaching out to take his cold hand in mine. Julian, I whispered softly, leaning close to his ear. I don't know if you can hear my voice, but I don't think they simply want me to take care of you. I think they are setting a trap to make me sign my own ruin. I rested my forehead against the back of his calloused hand, tears brimming in my eyes. People often say that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But if that prevention is designed to subtly push you into a deep pit, then even a mountain of cure cannot save you. Outside the mansion, the winter wind howled violently through the bare sycamore branches. Inside, the black leather logbook lay open on the table beside the bed, waiting silently for a signature that would turn the sacred vows of marriage into a confession of guilt. The terrifying silence inside the Croft mansion shattered the following afternoon. Driven by cold resolve, I bypassed the deceitful household and contacted Elias Cole, a trusted attorney who had secretly worked with Julian months prior. When Mr. Cole arrived alongside an independent physician, Dr. Evans, they immediately seized the tampered medication bottle and the suspicious black logbook as official legal evidence. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The trap Eleanor and Donovan had so meticulously constructed was beginning to unravel before their very eyes. When my in-laws returned from their trip, expecting to find a completely broken, submissive daughter-in-law ready to take the blame, they walked into a room filled with undeniable truth. Eleanor attempted her usual dramatic act, holding up a tampered capsule and screeching that I had tried to harm my own husband. Donovan stepped forward aggressively, brandishing a pre-written document that demanded I accept total legal liability for Julian's care and condition. He grabbed my wrist, attempting to physically force my finger onto an ink pad to sign away my life. Sign it. Donovan snarled through gritted teeth, his executive composure completely dissolving into desperate rage. Don't make me break your hand in front of the family. Get your hands off my wife. A voice, raspy, weak, but sharp as a razor, echoed from the hospital bed. The entire room froze in utter disbelief. Julian was sitting up. Sweat poured down his pale face from the sheer physical exertion, his eyes burning with a fierce, lucid fire. He was not miraculously healed, but he had summoned every remaining ounce of his strength to protect me. I wasn't lying here because I was senseless, Julian said, his voice trembling with deep emotional pain, as he stared down his family. I was lying here to see just how far my own blood would go to destroy me. In that exact moment, the dam broke. Mr. Cole stepped forward, laying out a crushing mountain of evidence. The forged medical powers of attorney, the altered insurance policies redirecting millions to Donovan's failing accounts, and the hidden audio recordings where Eleanor and Arthur calculatedly planned to frame me for Julian's demise. Caught in the undeniable light of their own crimes, Preston collapsed in tears, confessing to the entire plot, while police officers entered the foyer to place Donovan and Arthur under arrest. A few days later, Julian was safely transferred to a proper medical facility, where doctors confirmed he would make a full recovery away from the quiet poison of his family. On a crisp, bright winter morning, I helped my husband walk out through the iron gates of the Croft mansion for the very last time. We took only our personal belongings, leaving behind the empty wealth and hollow prestige of a family that had traded its soul for money. As we stepped into the sunshine together, I knew we were no longer victims, we were survivors, ready to build a real life rooted in truth and unconditional love.